She lived her whole life believing that a house was just a place where we live. Until the day he realized that the real loss, it wasn't the roof over her head, it was the silence that took the place of the voices she loved. On that Christmas Eve, the smell of cinnamon still hung in the air, the lights were still flickering, the table was still set. But there was no one coming. No phone call. No laughter in the hallway. Just her, the watch, and a memory that insisted on hurting harder every year. And it was at that very moment, alone, empty-handed and full-eyed, that she opened a forgotten box in the back of the closet. A box that her own husband had left before he died, with an instruction: only open when Christmas doesn't feel the same anymore. But what she found inside, it was not a gift. It was a testament, a secret, a turning point that would test everything she believed about family, love, and forgiveness. What you will see now, it's not just a Christmas story. It's a story about betrayal made with flowers, about love that survives death, about the home that doesn't fit in scriptures, and about the kind of miracle that doesn't fall from the sky, but is reborn inside a house. When someone has the courage not to take revenge, but rather teach. If you've ever felt like you've lost everything and still kept standing, if you've ever been hurt by those who swore to take care of you, if you still believe that there are homes that don't die with the sale of a house, so watch it to the end, because this story is about you. And maybe, just maybe, this is the Christmas when you'll remember where real love lives. The lights still flickered softly on the balcony, as if insisting on repeating a ritual that no longer made sense. Inside, the smell of cinnamon and pine still hung in the air, like aromatic memories that refused to leave. The fireplace crackled, but it didn't warm anyone. There were hanging garlands, red ribbons on the windows, and a delicately decorated tree, and an absence that echoed louder than any Christmas music. It was an old house, with faded red bricks, arched windows and soul shaped by decades of stories. But that night, what weighed most was not the old furniture. It was the emptiness of voices, footsteps, laughter that once filled every room. Sitting on the aged leather sofa, a woman looked at the frames on the shelf. Each portrait was a portal frozen in time. There she and her husband, still young, with their young daughter in their arms, illuminated by a sun that seemed to be gone forever. There was a certain sparkle in her husband's eyes in that photo, a hope that not even time could erase. And, even smiling in the image, the protagonist now squinted as if it hurt more than any physical wound. A deep sigh broke the silence. There was no one to listen, and maybe it was better that way. Home, she whispered to herself, is the last place the heart leaves. I did not say this as one who quotes a proverb, but as one who learns this truth too late. The phrase hung in the air as a belated revelation. Every corner of the house seemed to respond to her. The walls, if they could talk, would scream and lament. The wooden floor crackled with the cold of winter and with the memories that still walked there, even if no one else really walked. Every detail, the bell on the door, the faded carpet, the standing wall clock, was a relic of a time that would not return. Outside, the snow was slowly beginning to fall. Through the living room window, white flakes piled up on the sill, illuminated by the golden light of the streetlight. It was as if the outside world still celebrated, still believed in the spirit of Christmas. But inside, that night was more of a mourning than a party. The woman clutched a hot mug between her hands, not out of thirst, but out of company. I didn't want to drink, just hold something. Sometimes all that's left for us is to have something to hold on to when no one else is around. The landline, the old one with a spiral wire, was muted. No calls, no messages, no sign that this Christmas would be different. In previous years, she waited for her daughter, even if she was late, even if she came grudgingly. But that year, there was no promise, no excuse. There was only the echo of memories. And, ironically, The silence of absence seemed to scream more than any fight. It was the kind of silence that didn't fill. He devoured it. She stood up slowly, her knees responding with the sound of someone who had lived too long. He walked to the bookshelf and picked up an old photo album. He sat down again, opened the worn cover, and let his fingers wander over the pages as if they were blind looking for meaning. Photos of birthdays, trips, spontaneous laughter. Some yellowed, others torn at the edges, all loaded with something that no longer existed. With each page, his eyes filled not with tears, but with solid, dense, almost palpable longing. A longing that could not be cured with messages or flowers. Only with time. Or perhaps with forgiveness. She didn't cry. The crying had already dried up months earlier, when the last vestige of hope for reconciliation dissipated. Now, there was only that empty feeling, like when we opened a box expecting something valuable and found only dust. But that Christmas, as she looked back on it all, she realized that what she had lost was not the house, not the furniture, not the objects, not the portraits. What was gone was more subtle and more painful. The bond, the belonging, the certainty that that place was still his. The imaginary camera would move away from the woman, revealing the spaciousness of the house. The corridors in dim light, the kitchen intact, the rooms still tidy, as if waiting for visitors who would never arrive. The Christmas tree shone in the corner of the room, insistent, almost stubborn. And as the background music dissolved into the sound of falling snow, the narration returned. But that Christmas, what I lost wasn't a house. It was something that my own daughter's money bought, and that fate planned to return. With this last sentence, a silent tension sets in, and the viewer feels that something greater is coming. Something that not even the pain of loss will be able to stop. Years ago, that same ground that today creaks in silence echoed the laughter of a young couple in love. The first bricks were laid with their own hands, between breaks for stolen kisses and plans blown. Like promises in the wind. There was no luxury, but there was too much love, and that, in those days, seemed more than enough. Her husband, a soft-spoken man with a firm look, always said, "This house is not our most valuable asset. It is the altar of what we build every day." She, still with her hands dirty with cement, laughed with shining eyes. In those days, happiness was simple, pure, almost naive. The home gradually took shape. A room painted with paint left over from a neighbor, hand-sewn curtains, furniture inherited and lovingly restored. Each object had a story, each corner a memory. In the hallway, there was still the mark of the first family Christmas, when the daughter was only 3 years old and broke an ornament while running after a cat. The woman never removed that stain from the wall. It said it was stamped memory. And the husband, always observant, used to hold his wife by the waist and whisper, "Promise we'll never turn this into just a place to live?" The daughter grew up as every child should grow up, surrounded by laughter, rules with affection, and stories told in the dim light. On Sundays, the trio would sit on the porch to eat corn cake, while their father read excerpts from books about courage, kindness, and purpose. He believed that values were not taught, they were lived. The mother, in turn, made a point of filling the house with good smells, subtle touches, and the security of a home where everything had its time and care. It wasn't a perfect family, but it was solid like those walls. Over time, her daughter changed. First, the absences from dinners. Then, the silences in the car. Adolescence brought with it the distance of hugs and the haste of those who believe that the outside world is more interesting than conversations at the table. The mother, always patient, tried to understand. The father just watched. They knew that creating someone free was also accepting that that person could choose to fly away. But what really hurt wasn't the physical distance. It was the emptiness that settled in her daughter's eyes, as if home had become a crossing point and no longer a destination. An especially harsh winter brought something more than cold. It brought the diagnosis. His father, once so full of vigor, began to fail in words, to forget dates, to stumble over ideas. The doctor was clear but kind. Time was running out. The mother didn't cry at the appointment. She put everything away for the kitchen, where she cried hidden between pots. The daughter, already an adult and involved with her own world, did not understand immediately. "But you have always been strong," she said, almost accusingly. The father only smiled and replied, "Even the strongest roots, at some point, retreat to the ground." During the last few months, her husband made a point of revisiting every corner of the house as if saying goodbye in chapters. One night, he showed up with a small wooden box in his hands. He handed it to his wife with a long kiss on the forehead and said only open it when Christmas doesn't seem the same anymore." She tried to argue, but he interrupted her with a firm look. There was something about that gesture that went beyond the farewell. It was almost a passing of the baton, a key to something greater. She kept the box in the back of her wardrobe and never touched it again. Until that year. The next Christmas arrived without him. The lights were turned on more by tradition than by desire. The daughter appeared, but it didn't stay long. And the woman, now a widow, began to realize how absence also takes up space. The house seemed to have grown, enlarging its walls only to make it even smaller. It was as if everything had been stretched so that the void could fit. Still, she resisted. She tidied up the garden, polished the furniture, prepared her husband's favorite dishes just to smell the aroma. And, in every corner, memories, like echoes of what they were. This cycle repeated itself for years. Time, although specialized in erasing wrinkles and noises, has not been able to erase the weight of nostalgia. The daughter came less and less, the calls became rare, and the words, economic. The house, however, remained, like a reliquary of the past, like a holy temple, until signs began to emerge, and the woman, suspicious, felt that something much deeper was coming. The approaching Christmas would not be just another date. It would be the day when her husband's promise would finally be unearthed, and with it, what the past has always tried to preserve. It all started with a detail. Small, almost imperceptible. A quick visit from a man in a suit at the front door, on any given Tuesday. The woman, accustomed to monotonous days, found the whisper between him and her daughter, who had come to spend a few days to kill the nostalgia, strange. The conversation was brief, but her eyes caught something that her mouth still didn't dare to translate. The man left quickly, leaving behind only a strong smell of cologne and a tightness in his chest that the woman could not name. It was on that day that she began to hear what no one was saying. In the following days, her daughter spent more time on the phone than in the kitchen. When he spoke, he lowered his voice, walked away, exchanged words such as signature, notary, negotiation. The mother pretended not to notice. He continued to serve coffee, sweeping the porch, sewing the cushions. But inside, something was turning. A sixth sense, an intuition that only mothers possess, the feeling that something much bigger than a secret was being hidden. It wasn't just coldness. It was movement. It was a decision. And she was not part of it. One afternoon, the woman went into the old office to clean her husband's books. And it was there, among piled papers and forgotten folders, that he found documents he had never seen. Property appraisals, sales proposals, broker contacts, all with recent dates. The heart beat faster. His hands trembled, but not because of the fright, but because of the confirmation. Here was the proof. Something was being plotted, something big, something that enveloped the roof under which she still slept. She held the papers like someone holding a wounded bird, carefully, in pain, in impotence. That night, she waited for her daughter in the living room. Sitting in the armchair where her husband used to read, she stared at the door. When the daughter entered, smiling, as if nothing was out of place, the woman asked sweetly, a sweetness that hurt, "Are you selling anything, my daughter?" The answer was quick, cold, almost rehearsed. "Nothing much, Mom. Just some papers from my work." The smile that accompanied the sentence seemed plastic, and at that moment she was sure the bond between them had been exchanged for a contract. And the value? She would find out soon. The following days brought more signs, and none of them subtle. Letters arrived from the bank, with technical terms and words that did not belong to the daily life of the house. One of them, in particular, made her stomach turn. Evaluation for the purpose of alienation. It was official. His house was being prepared for exchange. But why? Out of necessity. For convenience. Out of greed. The woman didn't know for sure. "I only knew that this was the house built with sacrifice, with love, with memory. And now, it became a cold asset, a number in a spreadsheet that wasn't even hers." The fuse came with the postman. It was a freezing morning, and the woman was watering the plants on the porch when he arrived with a letterhead envelope from the registry office. "Signature required," he said, without even looking her in the eye. When she saw the name on the recipient, she felt her legs give way for a moment. The envelope was addressed to her late husband. How could he? He had been dead for years. That could only mean one thing. They were using his name. Legally reviving someone who had already left, to enforce something that should not exist. That's when the lump formed in my throat. She went in and closed the door slowly, as if the air outside might contaminate her. He sat down at the kitchen table, opened the envelope with trembling fingers, and read each line with blurry eyes. Although the content was technical, the message was clear. Documents relating to the transaction of the property. His name as a reference. Her name absent. A dull ache rose up his back. It wasn't just a sale. It was a silent expulsion. A betrayal made not with shouts, but with stamps and signatures. With broken promises between the lines. She didn't cry. Not yet. The pain of betrayal, when it comes from the one you love, has a time of its own. She just closed her eyes and took a deep breath. He smelled the smell of the house, the sound of the kettle boiling, the touch of the apron on his knees. And it was in that silence that he made his decision. He would not confront yet. Expect. Like someone watching the tide change. He knew that his daughter would reveal it, sooner or later. And when that happened, she would have no words. He would have only a secret kept, and a prophetic warning that would soon turn that house into the stage for a lesson that not even money could erase. The morning began like all the others. Mint tea in the blue ceramic teapot, a half-open window for the cold to enter and scare away thoughts. But that envelope on the table burned like burning coal. Since the night before, he had been resting there, unhurriedly, as if he had a life of his own. The woman had spent hours staring at him, not daring to open it. But that day, something inside her, maybe her husband's voice, maybe the weight of silence, caused her fingers to move. With almost reverent care, she broke the seal and pulled the documents out. What he read made the world seem more distant. The deed of sale was there. Clear, objective, legal. Like a cold sentence from a judge who has never heard his version. The name of the house, the street, the square meters, the values. All the details were there, but none of them mentioned what that house represented. There was no room for memory in the contract. Just numbers, fees, and subscriptions. And there, right at the top, the name of the deceased husband used as if he were still alive. Hers. Absent. As if he had never been part of that story. As if his entire life there had been just a shadow, a favor granted, and now revoked. She sat for a time that is not measured in minutes. He didn't cry. He didn't tremble. I only heard the sound of the clock in the room marking every second like a slow and cruel drum of war. Outside, the world followed. Cars passed by, Neighbors swept the snow off the sidewalks. But inside that house, time had stopped. For the first time, she understood that losing someone to death was not as painful as losing them to the coldness of those who are still alive. The pain of absence was more bearable than the pain of ingratitude. And there, that morning, she felt that the real grief was still beginning. She waited for her daughter to arrive. He sat in the room as if preparing a stage. When the door opened, she smiled, not a welcoming smile, but a smile that carries secrets. The daughter entered with hurried steps, fiddling with her cell phone. The mother waited. He only said when he had his full attention, "I received something curious today." The daughter, trying to keep her composure, replied indifferently, "About what?" Then the woman placed the deed on the table, open, visible. The daughter froze for a second, enough to confirm everything her mother already knew. "You found out," she said dryly. And there, something between them broke, for good. The conversation that followed was a duel of worlds. The daughter, cold, logical, saying that it was better this way. She argued with ready-made phrases, "You don't need such a big house. It's dangerous to live alone. I just wanted to solve everything." But behind the rationality, there was something more. An emotional detachment that was frightening. The mother did not scream. He didn't hit the table. He just listened, like someone watching a movie where he knows the ending. And when her daughter finished her rehearsed speech, the woman just said, "So that's it. The house was sold. And you took care of everything without me." What most disconcerted her daughter was the absence of anger. She expected confrontation, scandal, drama. But he found serenity. That destabilized her. The mother was not in denial. She was at peace. And this peace was almost unbearable. When she asked if everything was okay, the woman replied with a phrase that didn't make immediate sense, but carried the weight of 1,000 stories. "It's okay, my daughter. Christmas will show you what I could never say." It was as if a prophecy had been thrown into the air, and the daughter, for the first time, did not know how to react. That night, alone again, the woman went to the bedroom. She opened the drawer where she kept the few things that remained of her husband. There, among old letters and a dried flower from many Christmases ago, was the wooden box he had given her in his last days. The one she promised to only open when Christmas was no longer the same. His fingers rested on the lid. It was not yet the time, but it was close. She knew. Something moved in silence, like a tide that rises without the eye noticing. And inside that box slept the secret that would change everything. She returned to the living room and turned off the lights in the tree. He sat down in the armchair and stood there in silence. There was no anger. There was mourning, a different kind of grief. To realize that, sometimes, betrayal comes disguised as protection. That love, when it becomes an excuse for control, becomes ego. And that, as painful as it was, her daughter would still have something to learn. Something that not all the scriptures in the world could erase. Something that his father had left written, and that only Christmas could reveal. The house slept in silence, as if respecting the weight of that night. The woman, sitting on the edge of the bed, looked at the wooden box as if staring at an old mirror, not out of vanity, but out of memory. Her fingers ran over the delicate carvings on the lid, each arabesque handmade by her husband decades earlier, when she still had the patience for woodworking work. He said that each curve of the wood told a story, that carving was his form of prayer. The box smelled of time, of longing, of promise. And for the first time, she felt ready to listen to what she had in store. With a long sigh, he turned the small golden key that was hidden in the bottom of the drawer. The click of the latch echoed in the room like the sound of a door from the past opening. As she lifted the lid, an imaginary breeze seemed to pierce her skin, as if this moment had been awaited by more than just one woman, but by entire generations. Inside, neatly folded, were three things: a sealed letter, an old document with a red stamp, and a small wooden crucifix. She didn't know where to start, so she closed her eyes and pulled out the document. It was the original will, handwritten, in firm handwriting, dated 3 years before her husband's death. The beginning was formal, but soon the words took on a personal tone. In it, he declared that the house should not be considered a common good, but rather a legacy with purpose. The most intriguing clause was almost poetic. This home belongs only to those who understand the true spirit of Christmas. Otherwise, it will be transferred to those who practice it, even if they do not have it. The woman felt a shiver. He had predicted it, anticipated, prepared everything. But what touched her the most was not the clause. It was the passage where he wrote, "If you are reading this, my dear, it is because something has been forgotten. Not for me, but for those who stayed. And that is why I leave this letter, so that oblivion does not become a sentence, but redemption." She held the sealed letter with trembling hands. It was addressed to his daughter. There was no formal addressee, just a simple one, for when she gets lost. It broke the mother's heart, not only because she realized how much her husband knew his daughter, but because she knew that his love had not given up, even after death. She did not read the letter. It could have opened, but he did not. "I knew that there are words that belong to those who inspire them, not to those who keep them." Carefully, he returned the envelope to the inside of the box. He took a deep breath, trying to digest everything he had just discovered. The original will invalidate any sale, at least morally. The deed signed by the daughter and the broker could not change what was written with truth and intention. But the true value of that paper was not in legal clauses. It was in the gesture of her husband, who built a love trap, not to punish, but to wake up. He took the document to the kitchen, where the heat of the kettle warmed the air again. He sat down at the table, placed his will next to the cup, and looked out the window. The snow continued to fall, slowly, as if time had lost its haste. And in that frozen landscape, the woman understood that she was no longer alone. The house was talking. Her husband was talking. Life itself spoke, in whispers, in gestures, in symbols. The miracle she expected that Christmas was not the return of her daughter. It was a chance to show her what can never be sold: home. He spent the night preparing every detail. He separated the letter, the will, and placed both inside a new envelope, tied with red ribbon. He kept it in the bottom drawer of the office, the one that no one else opened. Not for hiding, but to let time reveal, as her husband would have done. Then he went to the attic. He took the special crockery, those that were only used in important Christmases. He washed each piece with ceremonial care. He prepared the white towel with holly embroidery. He lit a candle. The dinner would be special, not to celebrate, but to teach. The next morning, as she passed down the hallway, she looked at the wedding photo, which had hung on the wall since they moved in. He touched the glass with wrinkled fingers and whispered, "I get it, my love. She hasn't yet, but I get it." His eyes filled with tears, but they were tears of gratitude. Gratitude for having loved someone who thought beyond death, who wrote letters to the future, who left wills of affection and not just of assets, who built traps not to hurt, but to heal. And as she returned to the living room, the sound of the key turning in the lock announced that her daughter was coming. Once again. But she didn't know yet that everything she sold, in fact, still awaited her. And that the real gift of that Christmas would not come wrapped up. It would come in the form of remembrance, pain, reconciliation. Or, who knows, a miracle. It was Christmas Eve, and the house was wearing its best costume. Lit candles, flickering lights, the scent of cinnamon and cloves wafting in the air like memories in the form of perfume. The table was set with an elegance that had not been seen in years. Embroidered white tablecloth, porcelain with golden fillets, crystal glasses cleaned one by one. Everything impeccable. But in the center of the table, there were not only plates and cutlery. There was expectation. And, above all, a plan. The mother had prepared everything like someone preparing a ritual, because, deep down, she knew that this night would mark something that no one else was prepared to face. The daughter arrived with her husband in the early evening. He carried in his arms a basket of expensive wines and a supermarket panettone. She entered with a smile that was too wide, a "Merry Christmas, Mom," that sounded more like protocol than nostalgia. Her husband was even more restrained. He greeted with a wave, kissed his mother-in-law's face without touching, and commented something about the cold. Their mother, serene, received them with discreet affection. There was no anger in his gaze, just a stillness that hid oceans. He guided them into the living room, offered them hot chocolate, and the two sat as if they were visiting an old museum, not the home where they were raised and taken in. The conversation was punctuated by forced memories. Her daughter commented on her childhood Christmases, but each memory seemed more like a distraction than a tribute. Her husband tried to remain friendly, but his eyes scanned the rooms with uneasiness, as if they were counting the days of a house they already considered sold. The mother, in turn, listened to everything lightly. He agreed, smiled, served the dishes delicately. But in his heart, he knew that this was not a supper, it was a theater. And she was the only one who knew the end of the act. At the moment when everyone was seated at the table, the mother got up to serve the wine. He put a little in each cup with ceremonial gestures. When he finished, he held up his and said in a firm voice, "A toast to the home that love built." The words hung in the air like smoke. The daughter tried to smile, but looked away. Her husband cleared his throat. And for a second, the silence was so absolute that the ticking of the old wall clock could be heard. The mother said nothing more. He drank calmly and sat down, watching the two in front of him as if contemplating a painting, but he already sees the cracks behind the paint. The dishes were savored with disguised tension. The daughter's husband talked about investments, travel, new plans for the next year. The daughter tried to look comfortable, but fiddled with the napkin with nervous fingers, until the mother, with a calm gesture, got up from the table. He walked to the old office, opened the bottom drawer of the desk, and came back with a thick envelope in his hands. He placed it on the table, between the platter of farofa and the French toast. The two looked at the envelope as if they saw a grenade being placed at dinner. And then, in the quietest voice of the night, she said, "Before they sold, they forgot to open the last drawer in the office. In it is the testament that you have never read." The silence was broken only by the sound of the paper being pulled closer. The daughter, now wide-eyed, opened the envelope with trembling hands. It was not possible to disguise the surprise, nor the guilt. The mother continued to sit, expressionless, like a judge who only presents the evidence, without the need for a speech. The daughter's husband tried to intervene. It must be old, it has no validity, right?" But the woman looked at him firmly and replied, "It has more validity than any soulless scripture. That silenced the environment, not because of the force of the words, but because of the truth they carried." Her daughter read silently, her eyes running along the lines with speed, then slowly, as if she were looking for some gap, some relief. "But I couldn't find it." The paper said it all. The home was protected by an emotional clause. The spirit of Christmas was the rightful heir. The sale would be morally nullified. And, worse, the money destined for something much bigger than bank accounts. When she finished reading, her daughter said nothing. He just looked at his mother with a mixture of shame and incredulity. And for the first time that night, it seemed smaller than it had ever been. The mother, in a low voice, said, "I knew you would come today, and I knew they would come to keep up appearances, not ties. The daughter wanted to answer, but the words did not come. Then the woman added, "What was sold was not the house. It was the memories. But what did you lose is still within that envelope." And with that, Christmas dinner is no longer just a dinner. It became a mirror. And in front of him, no one came out unscathed. It was not yet time for confrontations, but the time of truth had begun. The room, once illuminated only by Christmas decorations, was now filled with a more intense light, that of truth. The envelope remained on the table, but its weight could already be felt in her daughter's eyes. With trembling fingers, she carefully unfolded the document, as if handling something sacred or dangerous. The mother watched in silence, with her hands resting on her lap, as if waiting for the inevitable. The daughter's husband, sitting next to him, crossed his arms, impatient. But even he knew that what was about to be read would change the fate of everyone there. The first sentence of the will sounded like a sigh from the past. If you're reading this, it's because Christmas has lost its meaning. The daughter stopped, swallowed hard, and continued. The document continued with a solemn but deeply personal tone. The father had left instructions not only to divide assets, but to protect values. He declared that the house was not just property, it was a symbol. This home was built with bricks of affection, mortar of memories, and roof of promises. It should not be sold, unless the spirit of Christmas has been completely absent from this name. And there, he wrote his daughter's full name, as if invoking and confronting at the same time. She hesitated. The words seemed to burn his eyes. Her husband whispered something in her ear, perhaps legal advice, perhaps rational relief. But she raised her hand, asking for silence. For the first time in a long time, she was listening not with her ears, but with her soul. She continued reading. The will declared that, if the daughter distanced herself from the values taught in childhood, the house would automatically be transferred to a foundation, created by her father in secret, intended to welcome lonely people at Christmas. And the most impactful, the foundation bore her name. The mother watched everything with teary but firm eyes. Knew that moment was necessary. That her daughter's pain when she read that was the only way to break the wall that she herself had erected. The daughter's husband, now visibly uneasy, intervened. "This is arbitrary. A document like this does not annul a legal sale." But before the mother could answer, the daughter interrupted him. In a choked voice, she said, "Shut up, please." The silence fell like heavy snow. For the first time, she was alone in front of her own conscience. And there was no lawyer to defend her from that internal trial. Then, the daughter found a second paper inside the envelope, a letter. Unlike the will, it was handwritten, on yellowed paper, with the unmistakable handwriting of his father. "My daughter," it began, "if this letter has reached you, it is because my silence has been broken by the choice you have made. But make no mistake, this is not a punishment. It's a reminder." The daughter held the letter with cold hands. His eyes began to water. The father's words continued. "The world will try to convince you that everything has a price. But you were raised to remember that some things have value, and value can't be sold." The mother got up and walked to the bookshelf. She pulled out an old picture frame and handed it to her daughter. It was a picture of her, small, sitting on her father's lap, the two of them decorating the Christmas tree. "You don't remember it, but that year you asked me what the spirit of Christmas was," said the mother. And he replied, "That's when we remember that we were born to love, even when the world tries to make us forget." The daughter pressed the photo to her chest, as if trying to go back in time. But there was no turning back. There was only the chance to start over, or to continue lost. The letter continued, "If you are still able to be moved when you read these words, then Christmas has not died within you. The foundation takes its name not to embarrass you, but to remind you that you can still shelter those who have also been lost. Use the money from the sale to rebuild the house and make it a home for those who have nowhere to celebrate. Thus, this heritage will fulfill its true destiny." Her daughter's tears flowed shamelessly. The husband, not knowing what to do, got up and went to the other room. She remained there, hugging the letter, the pieces of childhood, and the promises that had not been broken, only forgotten. Dinner was cold, the untouched dessert, but no one cared. The mother sat next to her daughter and embraced her tenderly. "Now do you understand why I didn't cry when I found out?" The daughter nodded with a lump in her throat. "I didn't cry because he was still here, in every corner, in every gesture. And now, he came back to you too." They hugged. For the first time in years, that hug was neither formal nor forced. It was a reunion of souls, of blood, on purpose. And, at that moment, Christmas returned to live in that house. At the window, snowflakes danced under the light of the streetlight, as if celebrating in silence. The house seemed to breathe again. The furniture, the walls, the floor, everything made sense again. And as mother and daughter retreated to the table with gentle gestures, a certainty was born there. The supper had not been an end, but a beginning. And the will, more than a legal letter, had been a call to humanity. A reminder that love may have clauses, but it never has a deadline. And that there are inheritances that are not told in coins, but in miracles. The day dawned whiter than usual. Snow covered the roofs, the branches of the trees, and even the front gate, as if nature itself had decided to bless the place with a veil of rebirth. The house was alive, but unlike all other Christmases. It didn't just house people. It pulsated with the soul of one who had decided, at last, to forgive. The mother went down the stairs slowly, leaning on the handrail that her husband had sanded by hand, and as she stepped on the last step, she heard something that had not echoed there for years. Children laughing, pots banging, voices in harmony. The room was full, but no one looked like a stranger. There were elderly people sitting in armchairs smiling as if they were part of the original furniture of the house. The children ran between the chairs with thick socks and bright eyes. And at the center of it all, as if she were the final piece of a long-forgotten puzzle, was her daughter, in her apron, her hair tied up, pouring wood into the fireplace. It was an impossible image until a few days before. But there, on that sacred morning, it seemed the most natural thing in the world. As if the home had called her back not only as a visitor, but as a guardian of the legacy she almost let die. In the corner of the room, a mural had been set up with old photos, phrases from the will and drawings of the children who arrived that morning. "Here lives the spirit of Christmas," said one of them. Next to it was framed his father's letter, protected by glass, but visible to all. The foundation already had an official name, House of Hope, in memory of George and for Clara's life. Clara was the daughter, and even though she still carried guilt, now she learned that the miracle of Christmas was not to erase the mistake. It was to allow it to become a bridge. Lunch was served with simplicity and honor. Each person had their place at the table, and it didn't matter their age, origin, or the pain they carried. There, everyone was equal. The mother watched every detail with teary eyes. The clock on the wall, once silent, now marked time like a maestro of destiny. When everyone was served, Clara stood up, raised her glass, and said in a choked voice, "Today we do not toast to the house. Today we toast to everything that cannot be sold. Home, love, memory, and forgiveness." A reverent silence formed, and then all the glasses were raised, in unity, in emotion, in miracle. Later, in the backyard, the children made snowmen out of donated scarves and old ties from their mother's husband. The elderly sang Christmas carols around the outdoor fireplace, accompanied by a boy who improvised a drum with a pot. The young pregnant woman, welcomed days before, received a trousseau made by the hands of her own mother and daughter, sewn with pieces of fabric kept since the times of the cradle. Everything was symbolic. Everything was healing. The house, which used to collect silences, now sewed new stories with threads of compassion. At the end of the afternoon, the mother went up to her room alone. She lit a candle next to the picture frame, the same one from the Christmas tree, with her husband and young daughter. He sat down in the armchair he used to read. The noise of the voices below rose like music, and she smiled. It wasn't just any smile. It was a smile of mission accomplished, of those who understood that to truly love is to know how to wait for the time of each soul. It is allowing the other to get lost, and then receive him with double the welcome. Because true love does not exclude. He prepares a seat at the table, even when the other forgets his way home. The daughter went upstairs with a cup of tea in her hands. He sat on the floor next to his mother, as he had done as a child, and said in a low tone, "Dad would be proud." The mother replied, "He is, but not from the house, but of you." They hugged, and for a few minutes, time stopped. The past, the present, and what was yet to come. Everything fit there in that embrace, in that comfortable silence, in that exchange of glances that said, "Now everything makes sense." Outside, night was beginning to fall. The imaginary camera would move away from the bedroom window, while the image shows the house shrouded in snow and light. Inside, laughter can still be heard, and the final narration, with a soft and mature voice, echoes over the scene. Some houses are sold, others are saved, but those that harbor miracles, those live forever, because love never loses its address. Some stories don't end with a period. They end with a mirror. Maybe you've come this far thinking this was just another Christmas story. But what if it's much more than that? And if it's about you, about your home, about everything you lost trying to protect what you thought was important? How many times do we close doors waiting for someone to knock, and no one hits? How many times do we sell parts of ourselves just to fit into someone's world? And worse, how many times do we spend our lives building walls when all we needed was a table set and the courage to forgive? Today, that house has come back to life. But how many houses out there are still silent? How many hearts keep unwritten wills, unsent letters, postponed hugs? Maybe this is the time for you to open your forgotten drawer. Perhaps the greatest gift you can give this Christmas. Or go back. To return home. To go back to someone. To come back to yourself. So, I invite you, if this story touched any part of your soul, if she reminded you of someone, or made you wish you were someone better, subscribe to the channel. Because every week, I'm going to tell you a new story, not to entertain, but to remind you that love still exists, and that he, as well as this house, still waiting for you.